Hi, Brenda with the Care Plan, and today I'm going to let you read and talk about one of my short stories, and it's titled Death Finds Me. And how this story came about was I took my two daughters in their 20s to Thailand for a month, and we hiked all over. And I'm a morning person, and my time was off, and we were in this, little hostel, is hotel hostel, and so I'm up early in the morning, and Nancy and I were really working on writing this book and getting some short stories out. And I really find it cumbersome writing, and so it's a challenge for me to get in a rhythm of it. So I'm like, okay, it's early in the morning, nobody's around, so I sit down and I start writing out this story on dementia. And literally, the first sentence I wrote was, "What do toddlers, the inebriated and the dementia person have in common?" And it's they all tell the truth, and they all tell the truth from a different place. And right about that time, this very drunk, beautiful woman saunters up to my table. And she was Asian looking with a Scottish accent, and sure enough, she was Chinese Scottish, and she was stunningly beautiful, and but very drunk and very in my space. And I was irritated. I just wanted to be left alone. And so I was, a bit curt at first. And I just like, I'm busy right now. And she just wasn't taking the hint. And she said, "So what do you do?" I said, I'm writing a story. And, well, what about? And I thought, well, here's a way to get rid of her. Is I'll tell her I'm writing about dying. That always works with people. When I often, especially in the old days, you tell people you're a hospice person, they go, "Oh," and they just kind of back away. Um, but for her, she's like, "Oh, really? You're writing a story about dying?" I'm like, "Yeah." And I said, "So have you known somebody close to you that's died?" And she goes, "Yeah, my 5-year-old just died 3 days ago." And I just stopped in my tracks. And that paradigm shift was like being slammed into a wall. And I said, "I am so sorry." And she's like, "Well, as a hospice nurse, I thought you'd have something better to say than that." And I didn't. Um, but what I did know is to become quiet and still, and I leaned in. I'm like, okay. And she felt that I wasn't, running away from it. And what it reminded me of is in Thailand, my daughters had done all the research, and we went to this uh, elephant sanctuary. And it was just this magical moment. We got to play with elephants all day. But when we arrived, we had to be cautious about approaching them. We had to be cautious. We could be playful, but we had to be aware. And she reminded me of this animal that was frightened, in need, in crisis, but yet was drawn. And I was careful not to ask too much, but I just asked some probing questions. And the first one was, "So what was your child's name?" It was Lloyd. And Lloyd died by picking something up on the beach that electrocuted him. I didn't ask detailed questions. And I was just cautious, and this bravado kind of maintained the whole time. And I just asked some other questions. "So what do you do for a living? You're so interested in stories." She goes, "I write children's books." And I guess, "Well, would you like," she was just like, she didn't want to talk about Lloyd anymore. So she said, "I want to read one of your stories." That's what happened. I'm like, "So, okay." And my pride, despite my fumblings in the beginning, was still intact. And I picked my favorite, most recent story. And she read it. She goes, "Wow, it's a good story. It's interesting. It's clearly you're compassionate, show up." She goes, "But where are you in the story? There's nothing about you and what's going on with you." And she had nailed it. she knew that she found my weakness right away. And I didn't have an answer for that, because she was right. And I started asking more questions about her. And one of the things that came out, because she was kind of all over the map, she was pretty drunk, and she said, you know what the thing I'm most proud about myself? And I said, what is that? She goes, I have the ability to love despite never being loved. And I just said, I'm going to guess Lloyd really loved you. And that was the kind of the crack in her bravado, but it didn't last long. And, but she felt it. I felt it. And so this kind of went back and forth, but it was a little bit precarious. And then she lights up a cigarette, and at this, the guy at the front desk, he was clearly uncomfortable with what was going on. He was at a bit of a distance, and by her lighting up a cigarette, that gave her a reason to leave. And so he said, hey, you need to leave. And so she stands, throws on her cloak of bravado once again, and I stand with her. And there's just this moment, we just look at each other, and we hugged. And she felt that I leaned in, and she broke for a moment, and I just held her. And then she broke away, the mask back on, and she saunters out with her cigarette. And I just sat there, just moved by this moment. And when my daughters got up that morning, I said, I gotta tell you what happened this morning. And I said, because my whole life, I've as an early person, I was faced with a lot of loss, a lot of death. I ended up early in career working with the death and dying. And I said to my daughter, I said, does death find me? She says, no, Mom, death doesn't find you. It's just that your awareness is so high about it. It's just a fact. And I think she's right. But I also felt like that moment that death does find me. And I really took to heart what she asked me, where was I in the story? And she kind of nailed it, that I didn't show up. I didn't show my vulnerability. My work and my practice, I'm very comfortable for years sitting in people's suffering. With my own self-work, I'm comfortable sitting in my own suffering. What I'm not comfortable with is having my own suffering witnessed, being vulnerable in front of others. And the irony is that's the one thing that probably has stopped me from having what I wanted. Since then, that story was a long time ago. I have become more comfortable sitting in the presence of my own suffering with that being witnessed. And I have a lot, Nancy to be thanked for, my lovely husband, my daughters, and this woman pointing it out to me. It really piqued my awareness. It's like, it's okay to be vulnerable in front of others. The other thing that this story brought up for me is, I think one of my greatest fears is losing a child. I have taken care of a lot of children who have died and been with their parents, and it's a very difficult thing to do. And because I've had so much loss, I have this unrealistic thought in my brain that's like, well, I've already had a lot of loss. That's never going to happen to me, which of course it could. And it's probably still my biggest fear is losing a child, because you're never the same. In fact, in the English language, there is no word for a person who has lost a child. If you've lost a spouse, you're a widow or a widower. If you've lost a parent, you're an orphan. And having that word just kind of ties to it. But for parents who have lost a child, you're never the same. And the only words I can offer in that is your ability to love is the only thing that can see you through that. And so that's my story. There's a lot more to the story in the website story under short stories, thecareplan.net. And we're now putting these little short stories on a video section for short stories on our YouTube channel, The Care Plan. So thank you for taking time to listen to my story.